Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So,
Hello.
is that Dave? Hi, David.
Yeah. So is
Um,
this it, you and me?
uh, looks like it right now, but we usually have some people join in. But I'm recording these anyway, so even if you weren't here, I'd still do it. although,
Ah, okay.
although the Q&A would be rather short.
Might be short anyway, but
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to start out recapping what we've done at previous sessions. And we just started this at the beginning of the month, so there haven't been that many. And then today I'm going to talk about XL statements security. So July 1, I stuffed in what was a 1-hour presentation that I had for a user group, and there was too much in there. So I'm going to hit some of these topics again and just concentrate on one at a time, because I'm trying to keep the tips and tricks part of these to less than half an hour. So July 8th went over XL recalculation. July 15th, a couple of relatively simple Excel formulas or Excel functions, I should say, that are helpful in doing an Excel statements financial report. And then last week we went over how to display variance in one of your reports. And these recordings are on our Excel Statements YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and just look for Excel Statements channel, you should see them there. So Excel Statement Security, there are two different forms of security that we have, modular and compartmental, and you can use either or both of these. So modular blocks how far you can drill down on a balance or on a transaction when you're drilling down. And then compartmental, which I think is the more important one, that filters what a particular person is able to see based on company, account, or most often sub-account, using a mask for the sub-account. And just let you know, and David's out there and he knows that Excel Statements admins are not exempt when you turn one of these on. When you enable one of these security, it doesn't mean though that as an admin you can't go back in and turn it off unless you get into a state where you turn modular security on and you have no rights in Dynamics SL, in which case email me. And we did change that in version 3 after seeing someone get stuck. And the reason why, it used to be that if you're an admin, it bypassed all security, but we actually had a consultant ask for the opposite because he wanted to test compartmental security for a client, and he also wanted to be able to demo it for clients and prospects to show them what would happen if he turned on compartmental security and filtered his own user about what you would then see. And then, of course, as an admin, you can go back in and take the filter off. So you're not doing it, well, maybe you're doing it to filter yourself, but you can always change it if you are an admin. And the July 8th, we went over who is an Excel Statements admin. So modular security, it actually uses the Dynamics SL access rights. So what you have in your administration, where you can create users, create groups, and then set access control on users or groups. And this builds off of that. So we didn't build our own little tables of settings for determining what you can and cannot see. And I'll show you the specific reports that are used for this in a couple of screens. So in order to use modular security, all of your Excel Statements users have to have a Dynamics SL user ID. If you don't have modular security, then that's pretty much optional. Your Excel Statements users don't have to have a corresponding user ID in Dynamics SL. But if you want to use modular security, because we're looking at access rights in Dynamics SL, then you have to go create a user ID for them if they don't have one. And they don't have to be actual Dynamics SL users, and you certainly don't need to tell them that they have any rights in it. And typically you wouldn't give them access to the Dynamics SL program anyway. You know, if these are a bunch of managers and they're getting internal XLstatements reports and you're using modular security for some reason, then you would need to go in and create an ID for each and then give them view rights on the relative reports. And in Dynamics SL, you can make an unlimited number of user IDs, and the licensing of Dynamics SL, unlike the licensing for XLstatements, is based on the maximum number of users who are using Dynamics SL at any one time. So you can have 2 licenses for Dynamics SL, and you can have 2,000 users set up in Dynamics SL, and as long as no more than 2 of those are using it at any one time, you're not going to run into the license restriction. So Dynamics SL has 2 authentication models, and you have to set it to use one or the other. And the old one, the original one, was what they called SQL authentication. And that means that it's not an integrated login, and that's where you always are going to get the password screen when you start up Dynamics SL. And so you need to know your user ID and you need to know your password, which it'll keep the last user ID that was used on that workstation, but that requires having a Dynamics SL. It requires putting that ID and password in every time you start Dynamics SL. The other more recent option, and this is like 10 years ago, so it's not all that recent, is Windows authentication, and that lets you bypass a password. You can optionally have a password there as well, but the idea is it knows who you're logged into Windows as, and so it knows who you are, and Dynamics SL has to have a link between everybody's Dynamics SL user ID and then their Windows account. And we consider best practice to use Windows authentication as a consultant, not as XLstatements per se. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is if you decide at some point to start using web apps, you're really going to want to use Windows authentication rather than SQL authentication. And then the other is for better security and SQL authentication. You can't make that meet Sarbanes-Oxley requirements unless you get some kind of third-party thing. I think there used to be one. And to meet Sarbanes-Oxley requirements, you then have to set up Windows, which your Windows domain as far as what it requires you to do for passwords. So, you know, a certain complexity, you have to change it every X days and all that. You do that in Windows, and then of course, because Dynamics SL is then using your Windows authentication, then that can satisfy Sarbanes-Oxley requirements if you're a public company. And something that some people don't know is you can use Windows authentication and you can still put a password on yourself. So it knows who you are, but it can still ask for a password when you go in. So if you don't, if you worry about somebody walking up to your workstation while you're away from your desk and just being able to get in because you're logged into Windows, and you're not locking your screen every time you leave, which is of course what the security people will tell you to do, then putting a password in there can be helpful. So with Dynamics SL SQL authentication, then the user maintenance screen, when you're using SQL authentication, is missing the field for, and I'll show you this on the screen, it's missing the field to put in the Windows account. And so they don't give you a way to link. And so we do give you a way to link, and I'm going to show you that in a screen that we have. So yeah, and when you're using Windows authentication, then there's a spot on user maintenance screen where you have to put in everybody's Windows account name. So if you're using SQL authentication, then there's a button on the setup screen that you won't see if you're using SQL authentication, there's a button on the setup screen that you won't see if you're using Windows authentication, and that opens this screen up. And you don't need to use that button if you're not using modular security, just so you know, except for two exceptions that I'll show you in a couple of slides. And so this map user screen comes up, and then you choose the Windows login name and then the SL user ID, and it's going to list SL user IDs who have rights to XL statements, typically based on a domain group that they're put into. And then on the left, it's valid Windows login names for use with XL statements. Actually, that's the one I meant as far as having access to XL statements. So on the left, you will not see all the users on your network, but you'll only see ones that have enough rights to use XL statements, which are typically given explicitly. And then on the right, you're going to see all of your SL user IDs. And then when you link them, you know, as you see there, you see the corresponding link. And these are the required access rights if you're using modular security. So if you want to restrict people from drilling down into AP batches, then don't give them view rights to the AP transactions report in Dynamics SL. But it is important, you're not going to be able to use a company at all unless you have view rights to the trial balance screen for that particular company. And obviously, if you give access rights for all companies, then in XL statements, you're going to be able to see all companies. But you can do access rights company by company or for all companies. And then the second level drill down, which is the detailed GL, they have to have view rights to the detailed GL report. And that's the same for drilling down into GL batches. And then you can see the other typically transaction reports that you have to have access to look at that report in order to drill down to those levels. And this list is longer in version 3 because it could have project modules on it. So here are the two exceptions that use Dynamics SL security even if you don't have modular security turned on. So if you're using the payroll module in Dynamics SL, then you have to have view rights to that PR transactions report in order to drill down to PR batches. And also, if you have turned on that the employee IDs go up into GL, you're not going to see those employee IDs if you don't have rights to the PR transactions report. And if you want to see what that looks like in Dynamics SL, just remind me when we get into the demo part of this. And then the other is for the budget option of XL statements. To press the button to actually upload budget or statistical balances, you have to have delete rights to the budget maintenance screen. And I don't know if I've ever seen a site where the person doing that already didn't have rights to that screen, typically because they're in the hard-coded administrators group, which includes rights to everything. And that brings up another point. You can have in Dynamics SL in Windows authentication, your Windows account can be linked to more than one user ID in Dynamics SL. And that's the way we, as a consultant, that's the way I typically set up a client. So the controller will have a user ID specifically for her, but then the controller would have, so let's say her name is Amy. So we have a user ID Amy where we put that user ID in the groups that we want in order to control the access rights. But then we'll have another user ID called, I don't know, Amy admin, and we'll put that one in the administrators group. And the idea is when Amy uses Dynamics SL, if she needs administrative rights to go in and set up a new user or something, rights that you don't don't want her to normally have, then she goes in and changes user from Amy to Amy admin, and they're both linked to the same Windows account. And so she would then use those rights, and then when she's done needing those rights, then go back in as Amy. So David, is that the way you guys do it as well?
Generally, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's the simplest way to do it.
Right. And what XLstatements does is you don't have to be logged into Dynamics SL when you're using XLstatements. So it just uses the least restrictive that you have assigned. So if you're in the administrators group, you're going to have all rights, and you're going to be an XLstatements admin. Whether you normally don't log in as the user ID that's in the administrators group or not, it just goes and says, oh, what rights does that user ID have across, or sorry, what rights does that Windows account have across all of the user IDs that may be attached to that? So compartmental security, this is the one that really makes XLstatements stand out. So typically used for this is for internal reporting, where you're creating reports that are used, reports that you're sending out to every manager or every branch or something like that, so they can see their own numbers. And a typical one might be expenses versus budget, with a variance column like we did last week. So if you use compartmental security for that, you no longer have to schedule, generate, or distribute those reports. It all becomes self-service for those managers. And so what you do is you create the report once, you save it in a shared location, and that could be something like a OneDrive out there. And I do recommend saving as read-only, and depending on the managers you're working with, it may be a good idea to also password it, just so that they can't monkey with it, because everybody is sharing the same one. And if you're saving it as read-only, you can either say read-only recommended, or you can put a password on it. And if you say read-only recommended, that will let them, without a password, go in and say, no, I want to be able to write to this. And in general, you don't want them to be able to write to this. So when you do a save as, and this is in the latest version of Excel, they're making it harder and harder because they want you to do everything in the cloud. So what you do, you go and you do a save as, and then you have to click on this more options, right? And you only have to do this essentially the first time you save it, and that will bring up the save as browse screen. And if you're using an older version of Excel, you're going to go right to this screen. It's just later versions that are making it harder and harder to save stuff not on the cloud. And then what you do is you go to Tools and you choose General Options right down here, and that'll open this screen. And this is where you can do a password to modify is what you'd want to use in this case, and then read-only recommended. And if you leave the password blank and say read-only recommended, then when a user opens that, it'll basically say, hey, you want to open this read-only, right? And default to, yeah, opening read-only. But if you're worried that someone may say no on open to read-only, then I would suggest putting a modify password on it so that they can't modify it when they open it. Yeah, okay. So
Jonathan, quick question on that. If you save these to a OneDrive, a shared OneDrive for your organization, and you happen to be at home and you open it up, do you have drill down capabilities on that?
Well, if you're using XLstatements remotely, just like if you're using Dynamics SL remotely, you're going to want to do a remote access to Excel. So what you're going to want to do is open up a remote desktop to Excel on the network, and then you can open it from that OneDrive.
Okay, so if you want to drill down. If you just want to read it, you can just read it, yeah.
Yeah, well, yes and no. The problem is if it's not disconnected before it's saved, then it's going to assume you've got XL statements. And if you try to use, if you load the add-in on your home machine and you try to use that, and your Dynamics SL, where's your Dynamics SL? So maybe you're connected via the WAN or something like that. XL statements is going to be incredibly slow. So we don't recommend doing that. You want your XL to be opening on a workstation, in this case it would be a virtual machine workstation that's on the same local area network as your SQL Server. Good question. Okay. So something you have to know using for internal reporting, you're going to buy licenses for all those managers who are not Dynamics SL users. They have to have XL statements licenses. They don't need Dynamics SL licenses, but they do have to have XL statements licenses in order to drill down, change the period, all the things you're used to in XL statements. And XL statements is licensed by the named user. So if you've got 20 managers using this and no more than 10 are going to use that at any one time, you still have to buy 20 licenses because it keeps track of everyone who's actually using XL statements, everyone who has loaded the add-in. And then there's another license you might need to know about, which is because XL statements is using SQL Server, Microsoft also requires licensing to use SQL Server. And so with the typical, what they call CAL licensing, you might need to buy more CALs in that case, more SQL Server CALs. And you can talk to your IT people about that. Or they may tell you, oh, SQL Server is processor license, in which case you don't need CALs. You can have as many users as you want. And then I've heard from users out there, controllers, assistant controllers, and the like, that you may have to train some of these managers. So out of those 20 managers that are going to be using this report, 10 of them may never have used Excel. Hard to imagine for those of us who live in Excel, right? And so she said, yeah, we had to train them on how to open an Excel report and then show them how they can change the period, how they can double click to drill down, and so forth. So they don't really have to learn much about Excel other than enough to make good use of an XL statements report. So compartmental security, you can filter what a particular person can see, so you can restrict what companies the person can see, what ledgers, what accounts, and what sub-accounts. And like I said, sub-account is the typical one where you've got a segment in your sub-account for department, and for that department manager, you put in the department code there for the sub-account, and that means that when the person opens a report, they're only seeing balances and, when they drill down, transactions that have been keyed to that specific department. And you can use, for these filters, you can use masks or lists, but you can't use ranges. So this, when you're doing a range of accounts, you put the colon in, account 1015 colon 1019. So that's going to give you, that's going to roll up accounts 1015, 1016, 1017, 1018, and 1019. But you can't do that with compartmental security. You'd have to put them in as a list, or much more typical, it lends itself to using a mask, particularly for something like sub-account. But if you only want them to see expense accounts, and all your expense accounts begin with 6 or 7, then you could say 6 asterisk, semicolon 7 asterisk, and that would filter those for you. So company ID filters, for if you have different databases, in version 2, you have to use separate rows for those. If the companies are in the same database, then you can use lists and masks for them. And then in version 3, we took that restriction away, so you can actually put them in the same row. It doesn't make a lot of sense to put them in the same row, but we had one complaint about it. And the reason it doesn't make sense is the reason for having companies in different databases is typically something like different charts of accounts or different sub-account structures, in which case, the filters wouldn't be the same for companies in the two different databases. And so certainly in version 2, if you do have multiple companies in different databases and you want to give people access to those companies, then you're going to need a separate row for each of the databases. And that may mean a separate row for each of the companies. And just like I said, you can have a lot of rows in there per login name, and that maybe you've got different filters based on which company they're in. And then we let you put these filters in through an Excel worksheet, and that makes it easy to do things like copy paste when you're setting this all up. Okay, and then version 3, we're still waiting for the testing demo databases, but I thought I would just mention some security enhancements in version 3. So compartmental security in version 3, you can put filters in at a specific drill down level. And so the classic example of that is, so the manager can see salaries on the report, but can't drill down and see the detail, the GL detail, or certainly the PR detail behind those numbers. And it's going to have a level number in there. And so the level number you give it is where it starts filtering. So level 0 is the same way it works now, where you don't even see it on the report. And then level 1, you get that mask expansion, and then level 2, it starts blocking after the GL transactions, and then level 3, it blocks in drilling down into the subsidiary ledgers. There's also project, if you have project option, there's also compartmental security that's specific to project, and that can be on company ID, account category, project task, or then the two managers, manager 1 and manager 2. And then we also have more sophisticated SQL security under the curtain in version 3. And so these are ideas we have for future Wednesday sessions. And if you have something that you would like to see, email me and we'll do that. And so I'm going to go into a demo here. Yeah, this is version 3 actually. And you'll see some of the new things. Yeah, so this is, I don't know if I mentioned this before. In version 3, when it checks for new accounts, it also checks for reactivated accounts. So if you had an account that was inactive and then you reactivated it, within the last 30 days, then it's going to show you that. And then in version 3, we can also check sub-accounts for you. Okay. Using the same, let's see if we got, yeah, okay. So this sub-account was reactivated in the last 30 days, but it's currently inactive. That's what it's telling me. So it became active, but right now it's inactive. So we're trying to give you as much information as possible. And this is also new now too. We're also telling you who the user was, who created that or whatever. And so system setup, and this is where the user's, what's it called? User setup, I think, button will be if you're using SQL authentication. And obviously you have to be an admin to do this as well, but that button will be here if you're using SQL authentication. And that's the one that opens that link screen that I showed you where you link the Windows account to the Dynamics SL user ID. And then security, and again, this is new with version 3 because we got the project compartmental security over here. And also in version 3, when you click up here, it lists those screens that I mentioned, and you can see the new screens in version 3 when you have the project option are on here as well. And so that's just, I think I've mentioned that we have some real online help now in version 3, and that's just an example of it. And so compartmental security, So when you first go in here, and you can't go in here unless you're an XLstatements admin, it's automatically going to put you in the list. Partly as an example, and partly is because if you set this up, um, if you save this without yourself being in the list, you're not going to be able to see anything until you go back here and put yourself back in. So it puts you in here. It puts asterisks in for everything, which means it's not filtered. And then this is new in version 3, is this drill down level. And so again, we give you a little online help now, and then you can choose it from the list here. And here's a typical way that someone would set this up. Administrator is probably not a good user here. So this is saying, what we're saying here is this particular user can only see balances and only, obviously in drilling down, only see transactions that are coded, where this case, this is the first segment, is 00 or 01. And so then when this user uses XLstatements, they're going to see a very different report because it's automatically filtering, and that user is only seeing balances and transactions for those two departments or whatever they may be. Okay. What else did I say I was going to show you? Something from here maybe. So the reports I'm talking about, obviously down here. So trial balance, if they don't have view rights to trial balance for a company, they can't use that company in Dynamics SL. They can't see it. It won't be in any of the company lists or anything like that. And then the detailed GL, they have to have view rights to that report. And I think people know what I mean about assigning rights in Dynamics SL. So this is what I'm talking about. And this is where you can set it to all company, or you can do specific company. And typical would be to set up a group for those manager users to give the rights to that group, and then put those new user IDs that you're creating for them into that group. Again, I don't think modular security is used very much. And so don't assume, oh yeah, we want to use that. I would assume, no, we don't want to use that. And this, I'm just showing you, this is using Windows authentication. And so we've got this Windows username that needs to be filled out for each user. And if you're using SQL authentication, there's just going to be a big blank area here. You're not going to see the field. You're not going to see the text over here. So if you're unsure which you're using, if you can go into this screen, if you just see a blank area here, you're using SQL authentication, which means if you want to use modular security, you're going to have to go and create those user IDs in Dynamics SL on this screen, on this user maintenance screen, and then use that button and then the link screen in XLstatements. So the other thing I was talking about are the two exceptions, even if you're not using modular security. If you want to be able to drill down, if you want to be able to upload budget or statistical ledgers using the XLstatements budget option, then you have to have delete rights to this screen. Okay, that's just so that you can control who can monkey around with those numbers in Dynamics SL. And then I also talked about payroll being the other exception. And so just drilling down to payroll batches, you have to have view rights to the PR transactions report. I think these make logical sense. And then to see the IDs, if you're drilling down that second level to GL detail, you have to be posting in detail, obviously. And then you also have to check this box. Otherwise, the employee ID will not go up even if you are posting in detail from payroll. But if you are doing this, then if you have rights to PR transactions, then it's going to show you the employee ID and the employee name when you are drilling down to that second GL detail level. Okay, I'm not going to save that. Okay, So any questions about that?
All good.
Okay. So any other questions not having to do with any of that?
All this is related to modular security, correct?
Except for those last two.
Okay.
The payroll and the budget, that's still in effect even if you don't have modular security turned on. So the normal setup that I see is you don't have modular security turned on. You're using compartmental security for your managers, but the people in the accounting department, you give them all rights, in compartmental security. You give them all asterisks. You have to set them up, otherwise they can't use XL statements. But then, you've got all asterisks in there for the people in the accounting department. Although I have seen very large sites where there may be an assistant controller doing these three companies and another assistant controller doing those three companies, in which case, you might use that. So they can only get into the companies they're responsible for. In fact, I was working with a site like that last week. So, and then if they have the payroll module, then you just have to know that if you want people to drill down and to see the employee IDs and names in your GL detail, then you have to have Dynamics SL user IDs linked to those Windows accounts, and they have to have view rights to the PR transactions report. And then, of course, the other one, which, as I already mentioned, is typically not much of a deal. Anybody that's actually updating budgets or statistical ledgers is typically has a user ID in the administrator group anyway, and so will have rights to this. But if you've never budgeted and the people maintaining the budget aren't administrators in Dynamics SL, then you may need to go in and give them delete rights to this particular screen. Okay. Any other questions?
I think I have a question on budgeting.
Okay.
But I'm not sure.
Okay.
So we have a prospect that I mentioned the XL statements to, that they currently budget in Access, and then they upload their budgeting, with the one number into the expense accounts. And they have about 30 managers that budget. What they ultimately want to see or have is the ability to, to budget in detail and be able to drill down to that detail. So what they effectively do is they'll go to, they'll have a budget for continuing education. So this person might go to this seminar in August, and it'll be, $1,000 and $1,000 travel expenses. And they might have another, a different trade show in August, and that'll be $500 and, $1,000 travel expenses. So the budget gets uploaded for $3,500 to the shows and seminars, and that $3,500 is pulling on the report, and it gives them, budgeted to actual comparisons. But when they drill down, they can see the actual actual spending, but they can't see the budgeted spending. Is there a way to link that to like another spreadsheet?
Well,
cell or group of cells that?
No. Version 3, well, actually, maybe version 3.5, because we haven't actually gotten around to this yet. But let's see. Trying to think. So in a future version, when you create a budget entry sheet, see, it's going to find a couple in here. Okay. And so these are your budget entry cells. And the reason, for those of you who have never seen budgeting, the reason it chose those two cells is because when we went in here, we said, yeah, we're working at company 60, ledger all zeros, and fiscal year 1999. And when you tell it you're going to make this into an entry sheet, then, and insert period columns was on as well by default, and that's why it put new columns in. It looks for PTD vals using that company, that ledger, and that fiscal year. And then it marks the cell to the right, the cyan color, because that's now your budget entry cell for that account and that period and that sub-account. And then when you send your numbers up, and this button won't be enabled unless you have delete rights to that budget maintenance screen I showed you. This is where you tell it, this is where we're sending it up to. Okay, and that's when you click this. It's going to take these, and it's going to know the account, sub-account, and period from the cell to its left. And so we call that the guide cell. So that's why these two were marked. And in version, future version, you're going to be able to go in and put, this is version 2019, so it's a little different. What's it called? They distinguish between comments and notes in version 2019. So you'll be able to put a note in on this, and then that note will then be visible on both the revision report and from the PTD val that's showing you that number in Excel statements. So they could go in and put a note in saying, $500 for this, $1,000 for that, and then they will be able to see that in here.
Okay, that cell that you're on right there, whatever it is, D7. So can that cell be a sum of other cells?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's real common to do something like forecasting using this, and so you could have a really complex formula in here, that's coming up with a forecast number for revenue or something like that. And
yeah, because I was thinking that cell that ultimately is going to be uploaded would be a sum of a list of these shows and expenses.
Yeah. So you could have that be the sum, and then you could go and grab that text and put that in as a comment. Go copy that. So we'll go copy this. Copy. I could have done Control-C, and then note. Yeah, this is what. How do I make a note? Oh, that's because this is protected. And when Excel statements protect something, that's because that box was checked. I'll tell you guys the secret. The password is Excel statements. Okay, so that's all I needed to put in there. Okay, so here I'm going to go, and now I can put a note in there, and then I'll just, it's not letting me copy that in. But this is where you would then copy that in. And I don't think that functionality is going to make it to version 3, but it will be there in version 3.5 where you can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard that before. So let me also cogitate on that, and maybe we can come up with a more clever way to do that. And somebody I was talking to last year said that their system let them do that. I don't think it was you either. They said that they had some system that was letting them see the detail.
You could do that with the BI 360.
Okay, that may be what they meant.
Okay.
Or maybe,
but, you know, it's $30,000 to do it. So
minimal. Minimal.
yeah.
But maybe, yeah, this won't let you get the budget, will it? It's so weird. They don't let you put detail in for a budget this way.
No,
And
they don't.
the other weird thing is they don't let you use statistical ledgers in here. So, you know, I've got a statistical ledger, but I can't work on it in here. So I can't TI into this or anything like that either. I have no idea why they put those restrictions in, but it's great for us because they make it so hard that if you're doing budgeting or statistical ledgers, it's kind of a no-brainer to spend the money and just buy it in Excel statements. Just buy that option.
Okay, good.
Any other questions? Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.